The Reproduction, Growth and Environmental Conditions of Different Plant Phyla by Joseph Ruiz van Walter and Gabriel Dysill-Hofinger.
These are 5 abiotic factors that impact the reproduction and growth of plants. Sunlight. Sunlight is an essential part of photosynthesis, and it also affects the rate of transpiration, therefore how quickly the plant loses water. Water. Plants need water to transport nutrients in their body, and it is used in photosynthesis. Bryophytes and pteridophytes also need water for reproduction. Wind. Wind allows for the pollination of gymnosperms and some angiosperms, and also helps in the dispersion of seeds, mainly gymnosperms. Soil composition. The nutrients present in soil affects how quickly a plant can grow, and the soil's water retention capacity affects how much water a plant is able to absorb. Topography. Topography affects how much sunlight a plant receives. This is because north-facing slopes receive more sunlight than south-facing slopes in the southern hemisphere. Wind intensity and the amount of rainfall an area receives are also affected by topography.
Asexual reproduction occurs when daughter cells are genetically identical to parent cells and each other, which can occur in processes like mitosis, and this results in no genetic diversity or variation within offspring or species. The disadvantage of this is that disease or changing environmental conditions may affect the entire species as they are all genetically identical. Sexual reproduction occurs when both male and female gametes are produced, which have half the number of chromosomes of each parent cell. This is as a result of a process called meiosis. Offspring aren't genetically identical to either parent or to each other. The advantage of this is that it produces genetic diversity and variation, which means that if a disease or changing environmental condition affects some individuals in a species, others may be better adapted because of genetic variation. Thus, sexual reproduction is more effective in changing environmental conditions.
There are 4 plant phyla: bryophytes, pteridophytes, gymnosperms, and angiosperms. Bryophytes include liverworts and mosses and are the only plant phyla which are gametophyte dominant and non-vascular. The abiotic factors in which bryophytes live are wet environments, as they don't have true roots, meaning that they can't absorb water from the ground. Instead, they have no cuticles so that cell walls on all surfaces can absorb water. Water is also needed for sexual reproduction, since the sperm cell from the antheridia in the male gametophyte needs to swim to the egg cell in the archegonia in the female gametophyte, which will result in fertilization. A sporophyte will then grow, which uses asexual reproduction to produce more gametophytes, and it does this by producing and dispersing spores into the air. They live in shady areas because they have no cuticles, which means they have nothing to prevent the loss of water in sunny areas. The biotic factors in which bryophytes live are a variety of insects.
Pteridophytes are sporophyte-dominant vascular plants such as ferns. The abiotic factors in which they live are moist environments, usually close to water, because when the sori on the underneath of the leaves disperse the spores into the air, they will only germinate on moist ground, otherwise they will dry out. Once it germinates, a prothallus will grow, which contains both female and male gametophytes, the archegonia and antheridia. Water is required for sexual reproduction, as the male sperm cell in the antheridia need to swim to the female egg cell in the archegonia in order for fertilization to occur, and then a sporophyte will grow. They also live in shady environments, as their cuticles aren't very developed, and spores will take longer to dry out in shady areas, so are more likely to germinate here. The biotic factors in which they live include a variety of insects.
Gymnosperms are cone-bearing sporophyte-dominant vascular plants like cycads and conifers. The abiotic factors in which they live are dry conditions because they have deep roots and don't rely on water for reproduction, but instead rely on the wind. They also live on steep slopes as their roots support them, and in direct sunlight because they need to produce more food in order to grow bigger. Gymnosperms produce male gametophytes, which are the male cones that produce pollen, which are the male gametes. The pollen is then dispersed into the wind and carried to the female gametophytes, which are the female cones. The pollen travels down the pollen tube to the ovule, which contains the female gametes, and is fertilized. The fertilized egg matures inside the cone, which makes a seed. The seeds are then dropped onto the ground or released into the air to grow into new sporophytes. Seeds contain nutrients which the embryo uses to sustain itself until it germinates and becomes a seedling. The biotic factors in which they live are a variety of insects, as well as having a mutualistic relationship with bacteria which improve the uptake of nitrogen for the plant.
Angiosperms are vascular plants which have flowers, bear fruit, and are sporophyte-dominant, such as feignbos. The abiotic factors in which they live are dry and wet environments, as they have true roots which enable them to absorb water from underground. They can live in different amounts of sunlight, water, and different soil types. Biotic factors that they use include birds, insects, bees, and a wide variety of animals, which are used for pollination and reproduction. They produce seeds that are enclosed in fruit, Animals eat this fruit, and this helps with the dispersion of seeds. They also disperse their seeds via the wind and water.
Flowers contain the reproductive organs of angiosperms. Every flower has petals which attract pollinators due to their bright color, nectar, and scent, and also protect the ovary. Every flower also has sepals which protect the flower when it's a bud. The male part of the flower is the stamen. Each stamen contains an anther which produces pollen, which is the plant's male gametophyte. It also has a filament which supports the anther. The female part of the flower is called the pistil. Each pistil contains a stigma which receives pollen, a style which connects the stigma and ovary, and an ovary which contains the ovules, the plant's female gametophyte. Pollen from the anther is transferred to the stigma through pollination by pollinators. Once this pollen lands on the receptor stigma, it will germinate and form a pollen tube. From the stigma, the pollen tube grows down the style into the ovary. Fertilization occurs when the pollen fuses with the ovules in the ovary. This process causes the ovules to become seeds and the ovary to become fruit, which surrounds the seeds, completing the reproductive process.